Poor secretary rented a boyfriend for $50, but he turned out to be a millionaire CEO and transformed her life. On a rainy Thursday afternoon in Manhattan, Claire Bennett stared out of the office window, her worn-out heels soaked from the puddles she'd stepped in on her way to work. The glass pane blurred the honking cars and bustling sidewalks below. She wiped it with her sleeve, the same sleeve with a small coffee stain she hadn't noticed this morning. Claire was a secretary at Hargrove Financial, overworked, underpaid, and barely staying afloat. At 27, her dreams of becoming a writer had been shelved long ago in exchange for filing reports, making coffee runs, and budgeting groceries to the cent. But nothing weighed heavier on her shoulders than the upcoming weekend, her sister Emily's wedding. It was meant to be a joyful occasion, but all Claire could feel was dread. Her family, especially her overbearing mother, always saw her as the one who never got it together. And now, with her successful younger sister marrying a well-known lawyer, Claire knew she'd be the center of sympathy or scrutiny. When her best friend Mia jokingly suggested she rent a boyfriend to survive the wedding weekend, Claire laughed, until she found a website that offered exactly that. The cheapest package? $50 for 2 days. With barely enough left in her checking account, Claire clicked "Book Now" before she could talk herself out of it. The man who showed up at her apartment the next morning was not what she expected. Wearing a navy suit tailored to perfection and holding an umbrella over his head with practiced ease, he smiled like someone who had nothing to prove. "Hi, I'm James," he said warmly, extending his hand. "You're not what I expected," Claire mumbled, slightly flustered. "Good," he replied with a wink. "That makes 2 of us." The car ride to her hometown was filled with laughter and banter. James was charming, attentive, and surprisingly curious about her life, her writing dreams, her struggles, the way she tried to hide her nervous habit of tapping her fingers. She felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. At the wedding, James played the part flawlessly. Her family was enamored. Her mother couldn't stop smiling. "Finally, Claire, you found someone decent," she said, squeezing her daughter's hand. Claire wanted to cry, not because she was offended, but because for once, she felt like she belonged. Later that evening, while the wedding party danced under twinkling fairy lights, Claire and James stepped out into the garden. The cool air nipped at their cheeks. "You didn't have to be so perfect," she whispered, staring at the stars. James turned to her, his eyes softer now. "I wasn't pretending, Claire." She laughed nervously. "You don't have to keep up the act." "I'm not." She tilted her head, confused. "I didn't take your money," he said gently. "I refunded it right after you booked. I run that company as a social project, an experiment in helping people through loneliness without exploiting it." Claire blinked. "You run the company?" "I started it after my mom passed. She used to say the world needs more people to just be there for one another. So, I created a service for that. My day job. I'm the CEO of Ashbourne Holdings." Claire nearly dropped her wine glass. Ashbourne Holdings was one of the most influential companies in the country, a quiet giant in tech and innovation. "Why would you do this?" "Pretend to be." "Because I was tired of boardrooms and egos. I wanted to remember what it's like to matter to someone just by being kind. And then I met you." Claire was speechless. The man she had paid $50 to pretend to care was now looking at her like she was the most important thing in the world. When they returned to the city, Claire didn't expect to hear from James again. But she did. He called. Texted. Invited her to small art exhibits and Sunday coffee walks. Slowly, a real friendship blossomed, and then something more. But Claire resisted. Her fears whispered that this couldn't last. That a man like him wouldn't stay. One night, months later, James showed up at her apartment holding a manuscript, her old, dusty novel she had abandoned years ago. "I found it in your drawer," he said, smiling. "It's beautiful. You should finish it." "I can't," she said quietly. It won't go anywhere. I believe in it. And I believe in you. With tears in her eyes, Claire took the pages from his hand. It was the first time anyone had believed in her more than she believed in herself. James didn't just encourage her, he funded a small publishing run of her novel anonymously, letting the book find its wings. It started as a trickle, one bookstore here, one review there. But the story caught fire, resonating with women who knew what it felt like to be overlooked and underestimated. Soon, Claire was being invited to speak at book clubs and interviews. She began writing full-time. And every step of the way, James was there, not as a CEO, not as a fairy tale prince, but as someone who simply showed up and stayed. At a charity gala a year later, Claire stood at the podium, receiving an award for her contribution to literature. Her speech was short, but it quieted the room. I once paid someone $50 to pretend they cared about me, she began, her voice steady but soft. But instead, I met someone who showed me that real love isn't about status or money, it's about presence. About showing up when it's easier to walk away. About choosing someone, every day, even when you don't have to. She turned her gaze to James, who smiled proudly from the crowd. This man reminded me that kindness isn't weakness. That believing in someone can change everything. I owe him more than words. But most of all, I owe him my courage. The applause that followed wasn't just for the book, or the speech, but for the quiet miracle of transformation. Claire's story wasn't about a millionaire swooping in to save the poor secretary. It was about two people, from different worlds, meeting at the intersection of vulnerability and kindness. It was about how one act of compassion, whether giving someone your time or your belief, can ripple outward in ways we never imagine. As they left the gala hand in hand, Claire looked up at James. $50, she said with a grin. Best investment I ever made. James laughed, pulling her close. Correction, it was free. Love always is. And in the end, that was the real transformation, not in bank accounts or status, but in hearts that chose to see, believe, and rise together.